Okay, in this chapter we're basically going to focus on the hardware and signage for our exterior textures on our chopper. Right now I'm just simply going to go through and look for some reference material and the actual images that we have, gathered to basically, get this kind of detail from. It's quite a variety of different types of, instructional, decals and various instructional signs that we can utilize for our chopper. So as you can see here in body paint, I have the basic texture layer there, and I'm just making a new texture layer in which to create some of these signage and hardware pieces on. Um, but I'm basically going to start, by creating, some hardware detail, such as door hatches and various latches and hooks. But these will be done mostly in Photoshop. I'm only using body paint to make the reference outlines for these doors and such. So it's just a good idea to refer back to your references until you get a good idea what it is that you're making, and just begin hatching in, that shape. So I'm going to do basically just start drawing in that door hatch from that particular chopper reference, and I'm going to basically rough in, a fairly good approximation of what it is that that door represents, and kind of in the same placement on our chopper as it appears in that particular real life version. And as you can see here, my lines are completely free drawn in freehand, and they are not really that exact or perfect. They're only here basically to just give a basic idea of what it is that we're trying to make, which is simply a door with some hinges on it, and that's pretty much it. So here I am just roughing it in, and until I get something that I think is decent, at least as a reference, I'll basically continue and move on. So just roughing in some scribble text here to indicate where real text should go, and pretty much thinking about other areas where I can include other decals or instrumentation that we can, have instructional text and signage applied. So here we are basically moving across the chopper and just, setting the overall placement to make sure it works. And as we continue along, basically, I'm making sure to incorporate a lot of the similar details that, our reference picture has. Right now, I'm at the door, and then I think I want to incorporate one of the exit latches or exit instructions, near this particular section. So I'm going to rough in, the basic text for that in this area so that I know when I take it into Photoshop what should be going there basically. And all you're really trying to do is just indicate some kind of idea for yourself so that when you begin creating the actual final versions of these decals and various hardware pieces, then you'll know exactly what you're putting in. So I'm zooming out to see exactly how legible it will be for those particular pieces, at what distance that we're going to see them at. Since the door is featured heavily in this shot, I think a little more interest should be paid attention to how that signage and detail is placed. For the most part, Mark, our art director, basically gave me a few notes to indicate what it is that he wanted to be done for the chopper overall, but also to indicate exactly what his contribution would be for the final signage and hardware pieces. So these rough layouts for the most part are only there so that I can have a basic placement and direction as to what to actually put there, or what will more than likely go on our exterior chopper. So once those details have been, emailed to me, I'll begin incorporating them a lot more into the design. So for now, we're just doing, the basic rough just guidelines and placement here until more final and permanent designs are passed along. And depending on how these come out, they may very well be incorporated into the design. So it's up to both me and the art director to basically flesh this out to a level that is consistent with the overall idea and look for this particular project, and also that represents the style that this chopper is supposed to be living in and existing in this future context. So here I am again, just in body paint, and I'm just fleshing in basic rough ideas and placement of where decals, signage, and hardware could basically go and look most visibly pleasing. So here we are back in Photoshop. I'm going to simply open up our body paint texture that was saved out with the actual layer already visible on it. And as you can see, the door placement itself is roughly laid out against the actual underlying wireframe mesh, which can be easily cleaned up here in Photoshop using the vector tools, similar to the way that we did with the paneling in previous chapter. So here I am just ghosting in the rough shape, and now I'm going to create a vector shape, actually a rounded rectangle, so that we can have a basic design in which to draw upon. So I'm going to zoom in here and just begin adjusting some of my values for my vector shape here. And I'm just going to basically rough in the equivalent of what the reference drawing illustrates, which is basically that main hinge design. As you can see, I can manipulate the actual paths themselves after the fact, and the fact that I have it invisible allows me to only look at the path and not the fill color, which can basically obstruct my view of what my reference material is supposed to look like. There's other ways around it and other ways you can basically do the same exact thing. I just prefer this method because it's pretty straightforward and allows me to do exactly what I want to do without compromising what I'm looking at the same time. So we're just going to go in here and make sure our hinges are pretty much symmetrical. And once we have those established the way that they're supposed to be, we're going to simply duplicate the entire form and transfer it to the mirror side of the chopper. But right now, if you notice, I simply copy and pasted some of the paneling layer effects directly on top of this particular vector shape, and all I'm doing now is adjusting some of the contour lines of the various glows and strokes here, so that we have a different type of bevel feature to indicate the similar type of sealed hatch that this door represents. And if you refer back to the reference photograph, you notice that there's some seamage between this door and the actual paneling of the chopper itself to indicate that this thing opens up to some type of compartment or whatever. So I'm just basically giving a rough idea of what that looks like. Later on, grunge maps and other forms of textures can be applied to basically make that look more incorporated into the actual whole itself. But for the most part, this should be more than sufficient for the type of detail that we need and that we ultimately see in these parts of the chopper. Again, the whole chopper itself will not be featured in the actual sequence that we are developing with the behind the scenes project. The main emphasis will be placed solely on the door and where Geo jumps out of, and basically where the actual chopper takes on fire from below. So aside from those few close-ups and main shots, overall the chopper will just be passing through frame fairly quickly and not really focusing on any one particular thing. So In this case, these kinds of details don't have to be exactly photorealistic. They just have to give the impression that there's some kind of detail or information there. And when lighting is basically passing across this color map and is applied to the spec map as well, you have some visual breakup and interest in which to look at. So basically what I'm doing right now in Photoshop is just tweaking the individual settings until my lines look right and the values look like they're basically making sense overall. And again, once I have this particular piece of hardware, constructed and laid out, I'll simply duplicate it and place it on the opposite side and as a mirror image of this, so that we'll have symmetry of those forms on our chopper. So just going in and making sure my color values are correct. And it's just a matter of looking with your eye at the actual design itself and also at what the reference material has, and making a fairly decent compromise of the two. And in this case, it appears to be working out for the most part. It's just, a rough representation overall, but a little more refined than what we did out of body paint for sure. So right now I'm just checking the placement and symmetry again, the hinges, and just repositioning them so they basically work for our design. And basically we have our door compartment here, so I'm going to basically add a handle to it by drawing an actual vector shape in the previously created vector shapes. And what you notice is that it picks up the same exact layer styles that are applied to the layer it's now coming from. So that looks pretty good. And the only thing we seem to be missing is a little detail around that latch, but that's okay. We can easily remedy that later. And so I'm gonna now try to create some extra depth and dimension around that door hinge by applying just a couple layer effects. And there we go. And zoom out here and look at my layers, making sure they're all organized the way I want them to be. And I'm going to basically save this out and basically move on to another, or I should say a different aspect of the chopper here. I'm going to basically now go in and look at some more reference material specifically for the actual signage itself. So I'm going to go in there and see if I can find some text in which to draw upon, and just brought in one of the actual reference photographs into Photoshop directly so that I can later on zoom into it much more than I can here in ACDC. This looks like a good reference here. I think I'll focus in on this guy because he actually has some legible text on his outer skin here, so I think we can utilize that. So I'm basically opening up a notepad file and I'm beginning to write and type out the actual instructions that this particular piece of signage has. I think it'll be a good addition to our chopper, and at least as a placement until Mark provides me again with some more permanent high-tech looking examples. But for the most part, this does give some type of history and wear that we need for our chopper to actually have some type of life and usage on its entire look and everything. So these kind of little details will help bring that about. Now, I don't want anything too prominent to be shown on the outside because this is supposed to be a secret type of military vehicle. So any kind of details that will give it away or that are pretty much not necessary if this were to exist in real life, I won't be applying kind of flamboyant type of graphics or anything, only because a vehicle of this type wouldn't utilize anything like that. But stuff like this where a mechanic or some type of flight engineer or what have you, begins to access and work around this chopper, they'll be able to, understand and identify the components they need to look at in order to do their job. So again, that whole idea and philosophy of making sure your textures tell a story and actually have a purpose or reason for being there, make it that much more believable in the end. So it doesn't hurt to, pay attention to those kinds of details when creating your textures, especially for these types of hard surface, objects. So again, all I'm doing is going through and just picking out, signage that I believe, works well for what we may have on our chopper also. So going through and making sure that we have incorporated some aspect of real life to our chopper is more than a good thing. It actually helps out a lot. So again, I'm just going through some more reference material to see if I can find anything else that I like. This is an ongoing process until the actual completion of the chopper, so I'm just going to keep doing that until I think I'm at a level where I can just begin working again in Photoshop. So here we are looking at some close-up details of the inner door cavity and area for the chopper. I see some signage in the back on that particular, what looks like a fire extinguisher, but it's a little bit too small for my taste and eyesight, so I'm not going to really focus on that too much. And I'm going to go through some more of these, just waiting for them to load up here so we can continue. And basically once we get to a point where, again, I think I have enough of, a reference or source to draw upon, then I'll basically start creating it inside of Photoshop. So I think, yeah, none of these seem to have anything really that much more elaborate or different than what I already have. It's just more of the same, so I like that little number. I think I'll do that. And I think that's about it for now. Let's go back inside our Photoshop document and begin applying some of this text to our actual texture. So what I did now is just open up a new blank Photoshop document, and all I'm going to do now is copy and paste the text from the WordPad file that I found into the actual Photoshop document. So I'm basically looking for a similar font that existed in some of those reference photographs, and I'm basically applying the text to the Photoshop document in like fashion. Now again, Mark is going to create some more precise and stylistically accurate representations of these types of signage and hardware. But until he delivers those to me, basically I'm just going to move on ahead, mostly for demonstration purposes, to just show how and where this placement of signage and hardware can go, and that's how you basically can approach, doing it in general. So as you can see, I'm manipulating some text here in Photoshop, just playing with the different, spacing and making sure the actual font is legible, so that when I scale it up and down, it actually makes sense still. So once we get to a point where we have something of a decent quality and nature, we'll basically drag it from this particular document straight into our Photoshop texture. So just making sure my headings and titles are correct. Okay, and basically I think that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is just fix the spacing again, and I'm going to just simply take it and just copy it over, shut into our Photoshop document, and I'll probably do some scaling once inside of there. And sure enough, as you can see, my text is way bigger than I need for this kind of detail. So shrinking it down is pretty straightforward. You're just using the Photoshop transform tools to do it. And yeah, just basically scale it down and place it where you think it ought to go. In this case, I'm putting it on a piece of geometry that I know for certain basically overhangs the main door. So that kind of detail is really good because that section of the choppers was prominently featured inside the shots for our behind the scenes sequence here. So here I am basically just going through again, identifying all the areas that basically have that rough and body paint outline, and I'm just going through to see if I have any content that may be missing or that can benefit from this type of text that we have now gathered. So again, I'm going in to resize it all, and just a matter of taking it and placing it inside the Photoshop document and allowing it to do what it's supposed to do, which is to be instructional signage for this particular piece of hardware or other pieces of hardware across the exterior surface of the chopper. So I'm going to basically position it so that it is affected by what's going on around it. And now I'm going to just basically take this text and reposition it. I'm going to shrink it down quite a bit. But it's still fairly legible even at that small size, which is not a bad thing at all. It's actually pretty good. And it's not going to become part of our actual door grouping, so that if I ever duplicate and mirror this door, the text will basically go along with it. And all I would have to do is to simply flip the text both vertically and horizontally in order for it to be legible again. So here we are, just repositioning that door latch and making sure it's lining up the way it's supposed to with its neighboring door on the opposite side. So just making sure the text is positioned right. It appears to be good so far. Just moving it around to take a look. And basically, yeah, I like the placement. I like how it's fitting. It seems to look cool there. Now it's just all a matter of eventually saving this document out as an actual texture and seeing what it looks like on a model in a 3D application like body paint. So just going over my document here, making sure I didn't forget any minor things for this particular section before we move on to a different part. So here we are back at the top of the door. Okay, it looks okay for now. And basically I'm looking for maybe that little detail right there next to the rescue, or what the rescue sign is pointing at, will be a cool addition to have as far as hardware is concerned. So I may create that. I think I like how that looked. So right now I'm just gonna drop in a little more text. Basically our exit and release button text. And as if you're following along, it's just a matter of copying and pasting from the Notepad file into Photoshop, and from Photoshop blank document that we initially opened just for the purpose of typing, or I should say copying our text into, we're going to drag into our texture. So I mean, you could skip that step and basically use the text tool in Photoshop directly in your texture document, but I prefer to keep it as clean as possible when creating textures so that I don't cloud it up with any excess detail or info. So here we are, just waiting for a file to load here. And right now we're inside of Maya. And it's going through my layers here to see if I forgot anyone. And I see this object here looks like it could benefit from some of that hardware a lot more than where we currently have it. So let's see what we can do about adding some visual interest in those parts. Right now what I'm doing is selecting actual edges inside of Maya so that when I do a print screen and get a basic snapshot of that area, I know exactly where to place certain, signs, decals, and hardware, so that the actual chopper itself will benefit from some kind of aesthetic other than its actual paint job itself. Also, when these decals and hardware are factored in and laid out accordingly, you increase the overall ability to make this look all the better. So here we are again in Photoshop, just going through the layers here, checking it against some of my reference lines and directional lines, and I'm just going to simply begin creating some of those little hardware pieces in which to incorporate with our text. So this will be pretty much a latch of some kind that either releases a main panel or door area or some kind of discrete, sensors or something. So just going to continue moving this around and applying some layer styles to it. It appears to still be working out here, so just fix some of the contours and some of the sizes. Looks pretty good. Just want to make sure it's nice even numbers here. And again, you keep noticing that I'm going back and forth between the actual reference photograph and what we have going on here. And I'm just putting on some little last minute details on this particular piece of hardware, and just making sure it represents, a similar style as to what's going on in a real life photograph itself. So here we are, just painting in some detail, and okay, I think that looks pretty good. Again, just some basic layer effects and some painting using the Adobe Photoshop brush tool, and we hatched out a nice little detail that we can ultimately, flatten out and just duplicate at will and apply in all sorts of places, so that you again have another layer of detail, another layer of visual interest, and a way to break up the light as it goes across the actual object and the final renders themselves. So having content that the actual render can bite into is worthwhile. And by content I mean details and actual texture itself. So here we are, just duplicating some of those little bits and making them, represent again symmetry on the chopper. So I'm simply going in to apply some of that symmetry on our chopper here. And I think it's time to incorporate some more text. So okay, just pasted the text inside of the Photoshop document, and I'm basically going to go through and iron it out here. And if you notice, I have a lot of red lines which basically indicate which way, up and down are on our chopper here. So using those arrows as guides, I can basically place my text anywhere I want on the chopper and know where it's going to basically arise. So here we go. Just organizing my layers again to basically benefit from this. Okay, that looks pretty good. I like the placement of that. That looks good. So here we go. Just double checking the reference materials, see if I'm forgetting anything. And for the most part, it's just a matter of duplicating and applying the various signage that you create along the way across your chopper. And I guess for the most part, that's it for now for us.